Hi, I'm Shona Lee, and I wish to tell you today a story about my work on what I am calling a cosmology of stories. I am a physicist, and I am also trained as a sociologist, and I am a practicing mystic in both Eastern and modern Western mystic traditions. And I have developed at the intersection of those three things what I call a cosmology of story. This is actually a project I've been working on for a period of several years. I have been also working on a writing project called Mapping the Universe, in which I contemplate the ways in which this particular type of story becomes a map stored in the body of the individual. This study takes place at what is the intersection of physics, sociology, and mysticism. And the first problem I have in explaining it to most people is to convince them that A, those three fields can be intersected, B, that there's content in that intersection, and C, that that content can be studied in a rigorous fashion. What I've discovered, though, is that not only are all those three things true, but it gives us a lens through which we can look at the world in new ways that, in fact, can be used to give us some insight into some of the thornier philosophical problems like ethics and aesthetics. I am using a non-dual description of the universe, in which I start with a consciousness prior perspective. I spent several years contemplating the consciousness prior, consciousness emergent problem, quite bogged down in the hard problem. And the conclusion I've finally come to, along with actually a fair number of people who are working in the quantum physics realm and thinking about consciousness from a physics perspective, is that consciousness is in fact prior, and the universe itself is, I guess I've become a monist in that case. The basic thing is that the universe is a seething mass of information in which these particles are moving, and the particles are transmitting and receiving information about their locations all the time. They generate fields as they move through the fields. They create ripples in the space-time continuum, and therefore the problem of emergence from an inert system isn't a real problem, because there is no inert system. So starting with this consciousness prior perspective, these are the axioms. This is the axiom from which I work, that there is a universe out there, and that universe has perceptible characteristics. So this is the perceptible characteristics level. There's a phenomenal world that we can interact with, that there is a real world out there, that it's not purely our own projections, although the interaction of the perception with that real world is key. The real world is described using these social constructions, which I call stories, but that refers to mathematical models. It refers to the structures of our societies. And the constructed self, which each of us experiences, is emergent from those stories and sort of takes place at the intersection of them. I also have this idea of the perceiver. And the perceiver is that which we have, which can observe the experience of the constructed self. And in this model, in my experience, the perceiver and the universe are one and the same, and these are levels of abstraction through which the perceiver is required to see, I guess, for want of a better word. So the levels of abstraction, the constructed self becomes transparent with appropriate consciousness techniques. So the question I have is, what's the nature of the persistence of the dualistic illusion, given that we have this fairly extensive literature and set of thousands of years of teachings on perceiving through the dualistic illusion? Why is the dualistic illusion so persistent, and how does it emerge from that self-aware parts of the universe? So I am also a mathematical realist, which is that reason I use psi down here actually is because one of the ways that we describe the universe when doing physics is as a wave function, that there is this wave-like aspect to the universe as a whole, and there's a time-evolving wave function, a time-evolving probabilistic wave function that the observer interacts with. One of the things that we observe in the phenomenal world is that the development of local order does take place. Things clump up, and there are stars, and there is something rather than nothing. And the development of local order depends upon this process that I refer to as entropy management. To stay alive, to maintain the local form that is a human body, we have to gather energy, we have to process it, we integrate that into the form, and we have to be able to find appropriate amounts of energy and regulate our temperature and access to. So we need food, shelter, and because we are driven to create these forms, we also seek social interactions. So the problem of entropy management is primary in the development of story. And it is because human beings, in the same way that we stopped making, this is my argument, in the same way that we've stopped making vitamin C, we no longer have instincts. This is one of the things that a friend of mine who's a sociology professor is very, very strict, that we don't use the word instinct when talking about human beings. Instincts are these complex behaviors that are inborn, and human beings don't have instincts. We rely entirely on learned social constructions. We require culture to stay alive. We must be taught, or we simply can't deal with our entropy management problem. We can't find food. We can't participate in the social classes, in the social categories. We can't integrate ourselves and keep our forms alive for long enough to experience. So one of the things I suspect, and this is in the category of things I don't quite know yet, still exploring, and I would really love to have conversations about, is the possibility that in the same way that we have to learn to walk, we have to learn to wake up. We have to learn to perceive through these social forms that are necessary to keep the form alive. So the basis for my model in thinking about how stories actually work in the universe and how stories proceed is this idea that in that seething mass of information that is the psi universe, wave packets form, information clumps into cohesive units, and this is the nature of matter, but it's also the patterns that tell us how matter proceeds, how it evolves with time. So evolutionary forms, when I say evolutionary forms, I mean things which evolve in time. And they take place over different time scales, but this is sort of a generalized sense of how things work, that they arise, and there are processes by which things arise in the phenomenal world, and there are processes by which things decay, and different phenomena arise and decay on different time scales. But these are ultimately, this is an information process. It's about the process of how the pattern evolves in time. And in terms of human body, we have a problem of scale. Here's the basic problem of scale on a single page, and this is the very first thing that I teach when I teach a physics class, which is the point of doing science is to address this problem of scale. The human body is approximately at the scale of 1 meter. The nucleus of an atom is 10 to the minus 15 meters. A galaxy is about 10 to the 19. The known universe is 13 billion light years in any direction, but we don't actually know how big the universe is as a whole. We can't see beyond the age of the universe times the speed of light. But the perception of an individual human being is limited from about this 10 to the minus 3 to 10 to the 4 meters, around a millimeter or less than a millimeter, the width of a human hair, something small that we can feel or see, up to our experience. This is about 10 kilometers, the distance that we can reasonably travel on foot or on a bicycle. And our time scales are limited to from a small fraction of a second up to about 100 years. And to learn about anything, we have to have experienced it multiple times as we try to categorize things and build heuristics. So instead of being able to learn about all of the things on our own, information about the universe has been gathered collectively into these storylines. And so the thing that I'm interested in, that I want to address in this problem, is what the nature of this shape is for stories and how stories are perceived, how they persist in the human body, what the processes are of them accreting, and what the dispersion processes are that allow stories and cause stories to dissipate. So this is my question about the information process of stories. I hope that we'll be able to have a conversation about it at the SAND conference this fall, and I'm very interested in meeting many of you and having many conversations about all of the various problems of the experience of non-duality and the science of non-duality. Thank you very much. Shona Lee.